The internet is now in a frenzy over claims that some of the most iconic designer bags are actually born in the East, just wearing a Western disguise.
Luxury brands, the Hermes, Pradas, Louis Vuittons, and Chanel's of the world, hailing in those examples from France and Italy, have rather strict EU guidelines when it comes to the labeling of their product.
The private label and licensing business is about a brand saying to X manufacturer, usually in China, we want to order these items and we're going to put our label and brand on them.
So instead of a luxury item having that negative connotation of made in China, you can now say made in Italy, made in France.
And now many customers are feeling scammed by the label.
In the middle of this trade war chaos, one question has been running through my mind, especially with so many creators claiming they manufacture products for luxury brands only to have the final touches and the all-important stamp added elsewhere.
China is exposing all these luxury brands because they've been selling lies to you saying made in Italy, made in France, but they're actually being manufactured in China.
What actually qualifies a product as made in France or made in Italy? Today we're deep diving into what those iconic labels really mean legally and culturally, and be sure to stay tuned until the end of the video as you'll leave more informed about what it takes to be made in France. The video that really triggered this thought for me was this one. Chanel has over 310 boutiques across 31 countries and is now privately owned by the Wertheimer family. Its offerings range from haute couture, ready-to-wear, fine jewelry, watches, and fragrances. Chanel claim that the majority of their products are made in France, and I'd say that this characteristic forms a significant part of their brand identity, with many customers finding value in their heritage-filled persona. But what does it take for them to legally label their products in this way? To label a product as made in France, a few things have to happen. A brand must follow rules established by French customs, rooted in European Union regulations on origin of goods. The mention or label made in France informs the consumer of its non-preferential origin. And by non-preferential origin, we mean the country that is naturally the origin of the product. Conversely, a preferential origin is when customs define the country based on the transformations it has undergone or the added value it has gained. When several countries are involved in the manufacturing process, non-preferential origin rules determine if the merchandise can be considered as originating from a particular country. The next requirement is that substantial transformation has occurred in France. Merely assembling foreign parts or packaging a product in France is not enough. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has heard stories about luxury brands producing their products elsewhere in places like China and then just sending it to France or Italy for its final touches. And so I was quite interested to find out how final touches would be defined, because in a lot of these conversations, the way that it's framed is almost like the entire products are made elsewhere in places like China, similar to what's seen in the initial TikTok that I showed you guys, and that literally only a clasp or a made in France stamp is added once it reaches Europe. So by law, the major part of the product's value must be created in France. There's no fixed percentage, but as a rule of thumb, at least 45 to 50% of the unit cost of a product should come from French operations. That includes materials, labour and overheads. The Chanel medium flat bag currently retails for £8,850. And so in order for this bag to qualify to be made in France, at least 45% of its unit cost would have to come from French operations. So the next question I had was around how are we defining unit cost? So unit cost is calculated by dividing the total cost of producing or acquiring a product by the number of units produced or acquired. So this would be the total fixed costs, and these are costs that remain constant regardless of the number of units produced, plus the total variable costs, and these are costs that fluctuate with the number of units produced. For example, raw materials and labor directly tied to production, divided by the total units produced, and this is a total quantity of the product that is manufactured. I haven't been able to pin down for certain the unit cost for, let's say, a medium Chanel classic flat bag. However, I think it would be fair to argue in this case that 45 to 50% of the unit cost would work out to be more than the price of a stamp or a clasp or a closure. The next requirement by law is that the claim that a product is made in France must not be misleading. So under consumer protection laws, made in France must be verifiable and accurate. Companies must be able to prove French origin with proper documentation. The official regulations that apply to French-made products are included in the EU Customs Code and include Regulation number 952/2013 and Article 60, and a French Consumer Code, which prohibits misleading commercial practices, including false origin labelling. Businesses are also given the opportunity to certify voluntarily. This is not required by law but can be useful, and they can do this through the Origin France Guarantee or through the EPV. So then the next question that I think is reasonable to ask is, what would be the consequence for a business falsely claiming that their products are made in France? Which essentially is the allegation here, right? These content creators are claiming that the majority, if not all of a product, is produced in a Chinese factory and then sent to France, where they are basically put in a bag and given to the customer. So if a company falsely claims that a product is made in France, it can face serious legal, financial and reputational consequences under French consumer protection and customs laws. So under the French Consumer Code, misleading commercial practices like falsely labeling origin are illegal, and penalties for individuals can be up to 2 years in prison, fines of up to 300,000 euros, and for businesses, fines can be increased to 10% of the average annual turnover. In 2023, Chanel reported an annual turnover of 19.7 billion. So if found guilty and fined in this case, they would be looking at a fine of about $1.97 billion. If French customs determines that origin labeling is incorrect, they can seize goods, administer fines, oblige businesses to relabel or recall products, and deny import and export rights in serious cases. Customs may also issue an official report leading to court proceedings. There are not only potential legal and financial consequences for brands, reputational damage is also what I'd argue probably one of the biggest consequences for brands. And we actually saw that evidenced after the Dior scandal and the Balenciaga scandal, with consumers' reluctance to buy from them anymore just because the trust was broken. I think establishing and maintaining trust with your customers is one of the most integral parts of running a successful business. If consumers don't trust you, they just won't buy from you. And so if true, the argument would have to be that Chanel are willing to risk their reputation in having the majority of their products made in China and then illegally stamping them as made in France. In France, customers and competitors can actually also sue for damages and pursue class action lawsuits or demand compensation. And I detailed in my last video a bit about corporate governance and the responsibility of the board and management to ensure that they are acting in the best interest of their stakeholders, which in this case would be their customers. And Chanel outline in a few documents, including their Legal at Chanel Fighting Counterfeits document and their corporate governance report of 2023, their commitment to ensuring that they are following laws and regulations and being transparent with their consumers. Chanel's 2023 sustainability report also highlighted several key initiatives aimed at enhancing transparency, ethics, and the environmental impact of its supply chain. These initiatives included supply chain audits and governance. They committed to increasing audits. In 2023, Chanel conducted 708 supplier audits across 27 regions and 13 sourcing categories, including cosmetics, leather, and textiles. In their California Transparency in Supply Chains document, they detail that they have conducted selected overall audits of suppliers, including audits regarding conditions of work and notably the use of forced labor. Such audits have been conducted by both internal and external auditors and have been conducted on both an unannounced and announced basis. They also detail efforts that have been made to obtain certification directly from suppliers that the products they are producing for Chanel comply with applicable labor laws. They maintain that prohibiting forced labor and human trafficking is part of their purchase order standard terms and conditions. Their sustainability report also discussed their governance structure and outlines that the company held 19 steering committee meetings to review audit plans, findings, and corrective actions with suppliers. It discusses a suppliers forum where over 200 direct partners participated in a forum focused on traceability and social sustainability, and that they also collaborated with external organizations on initiatives like improving working conditions for seasonal workers in Costa Rica's coffee plantations and supporting education for marginalized children in India through the Responsible Mica initiative. It discusses their supplier standards and details how the company enforces strict policies against forced labor and human trafficking by conducting both announced and unannounced audits to ensure compliance. Chanel's 2023 report underscores its commitment to responsible sourcing, environmental stewardship, and human rights within its supply chain. Now, as I've said before, I am a luxury lover. However, I am generally quite inquisitive and I do question everything. I think sometimes luxury customers are framed as stupid. You know, people who don't have anything better to do with their money and are just mindlessly spending on things that they shouldn't be, right? I'm definitely team everyone should do what they want with their money. However, I do question everything, and I think that it's important to provide a fair, reasonable assessment of what is being alleged, right? I don't know if these Chinese creators are telling the truth or not. Of course, I'm not there. I'm not Chanel. I don't know, but I thought it was important to share with you guys some of the objective factual details that exist, and this is in no way saying that Chanel and or third-party sellers are doing everything right, but should these allegations be true, it would mean that Chanel are not only illegally producing products, but they're also evading their legal duty to customers to act in good faith. And we have seen with the luxury industry downturn, you know, people are less interested in buying luxury at the moment. Some of the effect that brand scrutiny can have on consumer desire. We've even seen it as recently with Van Cleef, right? Any reasonable questioning of the quality of the product you're receiving has a knock-on effect on how much they're able to sell. So do you think that this would be a risk that Chanel would take? I would argue, if proven to be true, this would be a risk that would be impossible for them to recover from. Or what else do you think could be going on here?